I'll turn your volume up, then.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Torgerson, and I'm the General Manager here at McNally Robinson. We have a very special night for you, but before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 1 territory, the home of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers is located on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're so glad you could join us tonight, both in person and virtually over YouTube, for the launch of Below the Arch, a visual history of Victoria Beach, 1920 to 1960, by Mark Strople. Just two quick housekeeping notes, and then I'll get out of your way. The first is that during the Q&A, I'll ask that you raise your hand, and I'll bring the portable microphone to you. That's not because we think you can't speak loud enough, it's so that the author and the people watching online can hear you. If you're watching virtually, please just write your comments in the chat and we'll put them to Mark as time permits. The second is that after the talk, we'll ask you all to remain briefly seated while we get Mark over to the signing table, and then you can bring your books by and have them signed. I'll have more detail on the signing procedure for you at the end of the night. I'd now just like to say a few words about the person who will be introducing Mark, Gregory Thomas. Greg Thomas and Sheila Grover published a book about Victoria Beach, 100 Summers on Lake Winnipeg, a resort history of Victoria Beach in 2014. The launch for that book was held in this very spot at McNally Robinson and was very well received, a bestseller here at the store and is now out of print. Both are historians with a passion for local Manitoba history. Please join me in welcoming Gregory Thomas.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. And what a great night for a book launch. We packed the house, and I would like to recognize the family and friends and all the VBites that have come tonight to share in the publication of Mark's new book. And I got to know Mark a little bit as we were doing our book. And what I really got to know was that he's extremely generous with his resources. Yeah, Sheila and I, both being historians, had this long-winded 200-page manuscript, and we thought, how are we going to sell this if we don't get some good visuals and graphics in this book? And the first person that came forward was Mark Strople and said, I'm a collector. I've got all these great postcards, and there's a lot of great stuff in the Pine Inn establishment. Get me that, Sheila. Pinehurst. Anyway, Mark was extremely generous with sharing that with us, and we were able to put the book together, and away we went. Now out of print, so if anybody wants to give us some money, we'll reprint it. So first of all, a few words about Mark Strople. So as I got to know Mark, I realized, he's a bit of a Renaissance man. Now he's, professionally, he worked at the Riverview Center as the director of educational programs. But every time I talk to him, he's been doing something different. Since he's retired, if I go into the St. Vital Mall, there he is at the Jet store. I was talking to him about our Subaru and how I would lease another one. He said, oh, I work there. You should talk to Ernie. So I'm not surprised that, he's acted on his great love of Victoria Beach. And his background at VB goes back to the 1960s when he, as a young boy, stayed with his aunt and uncle on 7th Avenue. And that was through his teen years. And then, he stayed in touch with the beach. And in the 1990s, he and Nettie bought a cottage on 7th Avenue, an original cottage. And they've now rebuilt it. And every time you go down 7th Avenue, you'll often see either Nettie or Mark or their dog. Piper, right? Piper. So, they're always very welcoming and they wave at you as you go by. You're mad, you got to go to get a cab, da, 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 da. So anyway, Mark has this long history with Victoria Beach, and he decided that he would take that passion and knowledge and do the research and do a new publication. And I think he's been very, very successful in his book. And what I've got to recognize right now, it takes an army, a village, family, but particularly a partner to do a publication like this. So Nettie, I'd like to recognize the great work you've done working with Mark. So I think what, Mark has a gift to find the right stories and to visualize it. And he has been very successful in this new publication on doing exactly that. So not only did he have his postcards, he's gone to different archival sources, different community contacts, and come up with some of the most excellent material. And one particular area I'd like to point out, and Mark and I have talked about this a lot, is that there's the Indigenous people were at Victoria Beach, particularly in the early years. They're the ones that supported the construction of the early cottages. They were the people that were providing some of the resources to the early stores. And Mark's been able to illustrate this and bring that story more to life. Now, ultimately, we hope that very important story, that broader story of Indigenous people in the Victoria Beach area will be told. It's also very true of the settler community. We still could do a lot more in that area. But Mark has got a fabulous product, and I'm very proud of him, and I'd like to just hand it over to him, and he'll take it from here.
Thank you. My wife did say there will only be one book, so this is your only chance. Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. And again, I really appreciate Greg and Sheila's support throughout this whole project. They had, as a result of their book, binders of the Victoria Beach News and the Victoria Beach Herald from the very first issue. They were photocopied. And I can't imagine how long that took, but I was forever borrowing. I had the whole set at one point, but I'd borrow the 1930s Heralds, I'd borrow the 1920s Victoria Beach News and what have you. And that was my key source of information for the narrative that's in this book. And if I hadn't had access to that, this book would not exist today. And so I really do appreciate, I'd run things by Greg and Sheila. Can I borrow this again? Can I talk to you about this? And they are the historians of Victoria Beach. So I appreciate their friendship. I certainly appreciate their counsel throughout this whole process. For both of us, or at least for me, this was my very first book project. And didn't really know where to start, where to end. And it all worked out, I think, fairly well. I also want to thank McNally, Angela and John. John Taves couldn't be here this evening, but for arranging this evening, for promoting it, and just their encouragement and their guidance as I went through the process of standing in front of 105, 110 people plus. If you know me, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm humbled by the interest this book has already had. And it's the work of many people. I got to put the pieces together, but it took many people. And Greg, what you said a second ago really resonates, that it takes, a village to raise a child. Also takes, I'm going to say, a small city to put a book together. And I'll talk a bit more about that after, but this book had contributions from so many different people that I'm so grateful for. So I'll name some of them after, and I know I'm going to forget some of them as well, which will not be intentional. My wife would say that and I admit to it, I sometimes awfulize. Awfulizing is when you take a simple situation and you go directly to the worst case scenario. And so about a month ago, I'm thinking about this evening. And I'm thinking that what's the evening going to look like and what have you. And when you awfulize and you go to that worst case scenario, you begin to think about, and then you go down from there. I was concerned a bit when May 3rd, the Jets might be playing tonight. My wife would say, however far down you go, that never actually happens. It's never that bad. And so when May 3rd was certainly coming closer, I'm watching the Jets play, and she was correct, as she usually is. There was nothing for me to worry about. That's why we're all here tonight. But I do thank all of you for coming. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is I'm going to give you a brief overview of the book. The only thing I'm really hoping to actually read is part of the introduction, because that is my introduction to Victoria Beach and where a lot of the interest I had in Victoria Beach comes from. So bear with me as I go through that. I'll try not to be too long. It's not that long. I also have some lessons learned. I was an educator, so there's always something you can learn. And that's what I'm going to do. And it will basically be a summary of some of the things that I learned coming out of the project, that I saw as themes, as storylines, that I got from the Victoria Beach News and the Victoria Beach Herald. Then, as I said, we were going to have a moderated question and answer period. If I don't like the question, I'm not answering. And the book signing. One of the people that I invited who contributed to the book talked to me a few weeks ago contacted me by email. And he related the story, and I have his permission to share it tonight. And I'm sure Ross is here somewhere. But Ross, thank you. He said, does this just mean that we show up, or are we on a list of names to be checked off? Looking forward to the event. The last one I attended was The Birds No Longer Sang by Farley Mowat. And years ago at Eaton's, a luncheon. And he said, I assume you won't have a bottle of dark rum on your lectern. Yeah, Farley was a character. He then went on to say, yesterday, I said, I also noticed that Farley seemed to emphasize the racy parts for the older ladies, I guess, when he was doing his lecture or what have you. That I guess he was trying to see what buttons he could push. But one, there is no bottle of dark rum anywhere to be found. And as far as racy parts in my book, if you're looking for them, they don't exist. I'm sorry. But that being said, I hope you enjoy the book anyhow. So Greg has already talked about a few of these things. I am a collector, started collecting postcards about Victoria Beach soon after we bought our own cottage. Now, postcards of Winnipeg Beach are fairly easy to find. And the other side of the lake, and even Grand Beach. Victoria Beach, they were a bit tougher to locate. But in all, I managed to find over a number of years, probably about 110, 115 postcards directly ascribed to Victoria Beach. And so it's like, what do you do with all of this? And being a history and geography teacher by training, always interested in local history. I read, there were two books that came out over the past 15, 20 years. One of them even earlier than that. There was a book, 50 Years of the Victoria Beach Herald, that Maxine Clark came out with in 1975. Herald had been printed since the 1926 season. And that book included the front pages of the local newspaper from different years and what have you. Really, really interesting. But then I'd go turn the page, because it would start on one page, and of course, it would be another cover of the Victoria Beach Herald. It was still so fascinating to read and see what the issues of the day were. Then there was also the book that Sam Attia, the Attia family, being longtime residents of Victoria Beach, he collected some stories of from his experience at the lake, and published those a number of years ago as well. And then Greg and Sheila did their book, that was published in 2014. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the real definitive history of Victoria Beach, because it encompasses a lot more detail than I even get into in my book. I decided early on that I was going to use the local newspaper as my key source of information. That was both an advantage to me and a disadvantage, because using the Herald, using the Victoria Beach News, which preceded it, you're dealing with one source of information, and that source of information determines what is most important. And the editor for the first 25 years of the book was John Conklin. John Conklin was a very well-known Winnipeg newspaperman. He was with the Free Press by the time he retired for over 50 years, and it was said that he occupied more positions within the Free Press than anyone else in the newspaper's history as an employee. He started off as a newspaper boy, worked his way up. He was a city editor, did the society pages, he did entertainment and the arts and what have you. He was a very talented individual, and he literally published and carried the paper himself, pretty much did all the copy work, advertising, publishing, and news gathering for 25 years on his own. And he published this paper, approximately 10 to 12 issues every summer for 25 years. And he didn't miss too many deadlines either. So it was really, I've always described the Victoria Beach newspapers as a real gold mine of information back in the day. And so that's what I decided to use. But I wanted the information that I used to be attached to the images that I had gathered, my own postcards, and I put a call out, as Greg had said, for other people. I invited other people to scour family photo albums and what have you, and got some amazing photography from a number of different people. And so the Herald was my gold mine of information, but and I mentioned this in the introduction to the book, that it does share John Conklin's, what he thought was important, the news that he thought was important in the day, also shared his biases and his opinions. And if you know anything about newspapers, not so much today as previously, editors usually didn't sign their names, but everybody knew who it was. He did most of the copy, not all of it, but most of the copy. Occasionally, he would include a letter or two, and he only included letters to which he could write a juicy response to. So anyhow, that was part of John Conklin's legacy to Victoria Beach. And of course, the newspaper is still being published today. So we're coming up on almost 100 years in 1926, or 2026 rather. It will be 100 years since the first edition of the Victoria Beach paper came out. That's pretty amazing for a summer community, actually, and that it is still around. I've been asked what Before the Arch, the title of the book, actually means. It's kind of funny. It was one of the last things I decided on, was the title. Had the script and everything else. And Victoria Beach, many people I know who are here this evening are familiar with it, but has this huge arch at the entranceway. And so you stand before the arch when you come into the beach. Depending on what time of the year it is, you drive through the arch. But there's also a double entendre, because the time frame that I'm using for the book is roughly 1920. I cheat a bit on both ends, 1920, 1916 to about 1962 or so. So you're getting a few bonus years in there, even though it doesn't say that on the cover. So two main issues or elements: visuals and narrative. And the cover, I want to speak about the cover for a second. Very early on, I was down at the Western Canada Pictorial Index at the University of Winnipeg, and I saw this photo. I searched photos of Victoria Beach. I saw this photo of this young lady with the parasol. And I determined way back then, this is about 3.5 years now, that I wanted to use it somewhere because it so much embodied what the era of Victoria Beach in the day was all about. And so near the end of my research and everything else, near the end of the book, I wanted to acknowledge, and I started to search to see if I could find the family of this young lady. So I went on social media. And I said, I'm looking for the family of Margaret Daly. All I have on this picture is Margaret Daly, age 5, Victoria Beach, circa 1928. And I said, I know it's a needle in a haystack, but if anybody knows, I mean, her family could have been down there just for the day or what have you. Would you please get back to me? Within, I'm going to say 2 hours, I heard from not one family, but 2. And they both thought that this young lady could have been their mother. And I got back to both of them. I said, wait a minute, Margaret Daly, you have a Margaret Daly and you have a Margaret Daly. And yes, they did. And they looked to be about the same age or what have you. But 1928, Margaret Daly, Victoria Beach. Yes, my mom was down there. Yes, my mom was down there. So I had to go back to the University of Winnipeg, where the Western Canada Pictorial Index is. So now what do I do? And Brett Lougheed, their chief digital archivist, said, we actually have more pictures of Margaret Daly. We have 5 or 6 more pictures. So they sent them to me. And from there, we were able to determine which Margaret Daly this was. But it was so intriguing that there were 2 Margaret Dalys, 2 young girls at the same time at Victoria Beach. I went to the other family and I said, if you have any photographs of your Margaret Daly, I will try to include it in the book. I mean, the story was just too good. And so I was gifted a photograph that I could use from the other Margaret Daly. And the other Margaret Daly, well, she can't be on the front of the book, is on the back cover of the book. So there are 2 Margaret Dalys on your book. It was just such an incredibly nice sort of symbiotic, serendipitous type of thing to have happen. So there are 2 Margaret Dalys on the cover. And Greg has talked about, he in his introduction talked about this being an incomplete history. And yes, it is very much an incomplete history. I don't spend as much time as we could spend on the Indigenous peoples that populated Little Elk Island, or who sailed by Little Elk Island, who camped there, who settled there, as I should. Fort Alexander was not that far away. Many of the, it's Fort Alexander. It was not that far away on the Winnipeg River system. And many of the people, many of the men from that community were very much involved in the clearing of avenues at Victoria Beach and the construction of cottages. And they remain nameless. We know who the builders were, but their crews were often very much made up of the Indigenous peoples. And I want to recognize them. The same with the settlers, the early settlers, the Hamptons at Victoria Beach, and others who were in the area. That story still needs to be told, and I hope it will be at some point, because Little Elk Island has absolutely fascinating history. I do have a section in the book on the early settlers, but I don't go into the detail that it really deserves. Okay, just for a minute, then I'm going to read the introduction, and I'm going to probably do this, and I'm just careful of wanting to be mindful of the time here as to how much time I have. But it does provide some context as to how I got there. You think I'd know it off by heart at this point, but I'll go through it. I start off my introduction by saying I hated the place. There, I've said it. And I have a cousin here who can confirm that this evening. This might seem to be a somewhat surprising way to introduce a book that's taken 3.5 years to put together, but I ask you to hear me out. My introduction to Victoria Beach took place in the early 1960s when my aunt and uncle, who had a cottage on 6th Avenue, graciously had myself and my sister down for parts of the summer. I was a homesick kid. I was a city kid. So the idea of spending a summer at anywhere but home was not that appealing as a 7-year-old, and my sister was 2, so she remembers part of this. We'd make the trip to the beach in my aunt and uncle's 1953 powder blue Chevy Bel Air. And you knew that you were getting close when you made that last turn into the beach. We're almost there, I said. So I spent most of the days, beautiful summer, beautiful evening like this, inside the cottage, reading National Geographics. Seemed that every cottage had them, and if it was probably a law or something, because they were everywhere. And when I was finished with them, my aunt and uncle had a copy of the Field Guide to Birds in North America, which I devoured from one end to the other, and it should make me an expert on birds, but no, not at all. So I don't blame them for being frustrated with me. They couldn't get me out of the cottage, and I'm pretty sure I recall my aunt threatening to haul me off to the gate where the Red River coach bus lines would routinely pick up passengers in the evening and put me on it sometime and send me back home. But eventually I was encouraged to stick my head outside. It wasn't so bad after all. One of the tasks I had was getting water some mornings, and I'd be given 2 buckets to take down the street to the red pumps that used to be on every corner at Victoria Beach, and be asked to fill them both up. I'd slosh back up the hill with basically 1 bucket of water, and that's all my aunt expected ever anyhow, because the other bucket would have been completely trickling down the hill behind me. Eventually I met Fred Greengrass, and Fred's here this evening too. So our friendship goes back now 60 years, and 1963, 64. And we take those big old inner tubes from truck tires and tractor tires, and we'd bounce them down King Edward, and we'd take them down, let them roll down onto the lake sometimes on poor unsuspecting people who were asleep on the beach and what have you, and then they'd go into the water, and eventually we'd retrieve them. We also explored the beach itself. We looked at, we went to the town site in 1963. The train station, I believe, was still in the town site. The last train came in 1960, or left in 1962. We explored the old station before it was dismantled and moved off its current site. The railway station is still at Victoria Beach as a cottage, which is kind of neat. Had to take it apart, and then they reassembled the 3 pieces into one again. But we did that. We spent part of the time getting ice cream cones at one of the stores, either not the Victoria Beach Grocery, but Stewart's General Store. Sometimes I would take one of my aunt and uncle's dogs down with me, and there'd be ice cream for the dog. And once she finished hers, she'd look very much at mine like, "Are you going to share?" I was also enlisted to take Patches, the dog, to the dog show one year, and was so excited when in the next week's Herald, there was my name with Patches' name beside, because Patches had won an award, notwithstanding that every single dog won an award at the Victoria Beach Dog Show. My sister was dressed up as a bumblebee one year by my cousins, and she likewise got her a moment of fame in the local paper. And my aunt and uncle were very generous with seed for the chipmunks. And, depending on the season, there were either many or few at Victoria Beach. And they had feeding stations everywhere. So part of my job sometimes was to replenish those stations. And you really had to be careful. There were so many. I can recall some years you had to be careful that you didn't step on them when you stepped outside. In that particular block, I think the chipmunks waddled more than they ran. They got a pretty good feed. So even though I hated the place, it wasn't so bad after all. And my wife and I ended up buying, we rented from time to time up at Victoria Beach, and all the good memories came back. And in 1998, we were gifted the use of a friend's cottage for the weekend in the fall. Looked in that season's Heralds, saw a little cottage for sale. And long story short, we ended up buying it a few weeks later. It was a 550 square foot cottage, and that's after 150 square foot addition had been added. So it was one of the originals. So we've now enjoyed our property. It's 25 years this fall, that we've had our own place. So in that time, the inevitability of change has taken place, has crept in, sometimes dramatically, but more often incrementally. Massive trees that used to tower over our cottage toppled in the face of fall storms. They were lost to disease. Pioneer cottages, including our own, have now been replaced. The beaches have much sand or little, depending on the level of the lake. Friends come and go through the purchase or sale of property, or sadly and inevitably through declining health in their passing. None of this is new, it's simply a function of time. Soon after our purchase, a family circus cartoon appeared in the Saturday edition of the Winnipeg Free Press. Billy's walking with his father along the water's edge at a beach, and he asks him, 100 years ago, were any families having fun here on this beach? To which his father replies, probably Billy, but their voices have long since blended into the sound of the waves. As his father walks ahead, Billy turns and he looks behind him, where he sees the outline images of children and adults from the distant past frolicking in the water, shouting out to each other and having a lot of fun. So that image resonates with me. Certainly as I walk down our own avenue at Victoria Beach, go to the town site, and walk to the pier. When you're on the beach itself, you're walking where others have walked before us. And these, whether it's the smells from the bakery, the streets that we walk or bike on, the lake we swim in, the hot sand that we hop across till we find the perfect spot. We're doing what others have done before us. And the images that you'll find in this book, I hope, sort of take you back to that time. It was a very different time. I guess it could be argued a much simpler time. So I hope you enjoy the book through the images and news of the day on the pages of the Victoria Beach News and Herald. Now, having said that, I'm going to move very quickly on to what the book contains. What I found in looking through the newspapers from 1926 up to 1960 were a number of themes. And that's what I based chapters around, as long as I had images that I could associate with those themes. And so each section includes narrative. It may include images. Usually it does. Text boxes that were direct quotes out of the Herald or out of the news. And I've included the dates when those quotes actually came from. And also, there was some stuff that was just too good not to include from different years from the Herald. So I have what I call news of the day from 1926 to 1960, just excerpts taken from the Herald that I hope you find interesting. What I said, I wanted to talk about a few things from Victoria Beach during this era. One was privacy. If you robbed a bank or you wanted to not be bothered, Victoria Beach was probably not going to be your first choice, or not a good choice. Very early on, after the first issue was published, in fact, in the first issue of the Victoria Beach, which was published June 15th, 1926, the Victoria Beach News said, send in the news. And what they were looking for as far as news went were things like hospital stays, and even better, what you were recovering from, and that kind of thing. Who was visiting you, this kind of thing. Basically, it was a gossip column. The social pages of the Winnipeg, or what was then the Manitoba Free Press and the Winnipeg Tribune, some of the most popular sections, there was a section unto its own many Saturdays where they had all the society pages and all of the news about the beach, or rather about events in Winnipeg. And that carried over to the first editions of the news, which, given John Conklin being a free press editor, it shouldn't be too surprising. And so that became an area of real interest. And in fact, it dominated many of the early years of the paper at the beach. And people would look forward to either seeing their own name in print or others, and what their neighbors were doing. So the title of this gossip column changed over the years, or actually over a fairly short period of time. Started off as personal news, personal movements among the beach folks. It also involved the Pinehurst Inn's guest registry, the Pinehurst Inn being the hotel that was right near the pier. And if you thought you were going to hide out at the hotel, that wasn't working either, because we're pretty sure it was probably John Conklin going down to check the guest registry and to find out who was where and how long they were going to be there for. And the golf course's registration book was another source of information. And if you got a hole in one, you were going to be in the paper the next week, whether you knew about it or not. So there's two things I want to read just briefly, and these are these text boxes that I talked about. They're short. Oh, by the way, not everybody was happy about seeing their name in the paper. In 1929, a letter was published in the Victoria Beach News, and I'll read it. It's short. Sir, was greatly surprised and annoyed to see an item concerning my cottage and my vacation inserted in your last week's edition. You had, all capitals now, no authority from me, and I will thank you in future to refrain from any repetition of such impertinence, and to mind your own business. When I require a notice of such a nature, I will send it to the paper, and it will at least be a a truthful item. Your idea as an editor is rather amusing and very amateur in its production. So there's the two. Sincerely, or yours truly, and then she has her name, lives in Arlington Street, City, and her cottage was at 211 4th Avenue. So yeah, she was none too happy about seeing her name and when she was down and everything else, pardon me. At the same time, there was a cottage at the beach along the same theme, whose cottage name over its entrance simply read MYOB. When asked by John Conklin, who was out for his morning stroll, what these cryptic initials stood for, the news correspondent was informed, mind your own business, by the young ladies who own the cottage. So not everybody was enamored to see their name in the paper. And I have to say something here, because I do have a section on cottages and cottage names, as many as I can find, and they're organized by decade. But I've already had a few people say, well, where's my cottage? Or we've had our cottage for years. That was the only names that appear in this book are names that appeared at some point in time during their existence in the Victoria Beach News or the Victoria Beach Herald. There are families who have had cottages at Victoria Beach literally for decades, whose names never appeared in either their names or their cottage names and addresses never appeared in the paper because they simply didn't want to. But anyhow, so privacy, yeah, if you wanted privacy, you would be found out. So it was also described as a children's beach. It was promoted as a children's beach, which makes the choice for the cover, I think, quite appropriate. Many events were organized at Victoria Beach during this time frame that were very specific to children, and to keep them busy, to keep them out of trouble, and to give them a wide range of activities to enjoy. Sports Day, for example, originally started off as Water Sports Day, and then there were land events added over the years as well. Sand services. Sand services was like daily vacation Bible school. And it would not be unusual to have 160 kids attend the sand services on a weekly basis during the summer months on Patricia Beach, usually. Play education for that, for $1 a week, you can keep your kids busy. And that was for 2 to 3 hours. And finally, swimming lessons. Swimming lessons have always been a part of Victoria Beach because, of course, it's surrounded by water. Some of the beaches, notably King Edward, more dangerous than others. And those swimming lessons have always been offered free of charge to any child at Victoria Beach, because over the years, they have had their tragedies, they have had drownings at the beach. And so that was critically important, that children know how to swim or at least stay afloat when they were in the water. Appearances was also something, and I think I'm probably going to end with that as far as some of the lessons learned. I have a number, but I'm mindful of my time as well. Victoria Beach was very, very interested in how they looked. And that was very important to this beach, that they gave the correct, or not the correct, the right impression. They wanted to be different. So whether it was the railway gardens and the plantings that went on right next to the railway station and greeted people when they came into the beach, what people wore. In 1931, there was a controversy. The young ladies at the beach really wanted to wear pajamas to the clubhouse dances. I think they're the same pajamas we wear today, I guess, but the Saturday evening dances was sort of the social focal point for the week. And when they were turned down, there was a bit of a kerfuffle and what have you, but they just didn't, the Victoria Beach Club executive put a kibosh. The compromise was they could wear them the rest of the week, but not at the Saturday evening dances. It just didn't look right. Beaches, the very first year, the Victoria Beach Club suggested, or the Herald, or rather the Victoria Beach News suggested that possibly a good idea would be for the Victoria Beach Club to clear the stones off of the beaches. If you've seen any of the stones at Victoria Beach, they're not easily moved, but they said, it would make it a lot nicer and more comfortable for people to come down the dunes and right into the lake. Appropriate dress. That was a big thing, whether it was not just at the clubhouse, but on the station platform, in the stores, and what have you. The Moonlight Inn. The owner at one point of the Moonlight Inn was a dog lover. And in fact, he was notably involved in getting the annual dog show, which still runs today, going. And as it turned out, one of the provincial cabinet ministers was up at Victoria Beach for the weekend, decided to go to the Moonlight Inn for a bite to eat before he and his family headed back to the city. And the owner used to, and everybody at the beach knew these two lovely boxer dogs, but allowed them to run loose in the moonlight. They would come up to the tables or put their snouts on your lap and what have you, and just wag their tails. But that didn't go over too well. And the Moonlight Inn was called out about it, and it was a real embarrassment to the beach. The beautification of avenues and cottage lots. They had many natural blooms. There were over 300 species of flowers and plants that grew along the avenues, but that didn't stop people from bringing down flowers of their own, planting them in their cottage lots. That was fine as long as you had a decorative artistic fence surrounding your property, because if you didn't, all you were doing, it was a salad bar for the local livestock. And that was something that had to be looked at. I could go on, but I won't. I do want to say one thing though, and that is I want to acknowledge a few people just before we wrap this part up. Anyhow, it's just a snapshot of what you'll find in the book. Just some really fun, interesting stories from decades gone by. The beach is over 100 years old now, and it does have stories to tell. This notion of it takes a village to raise a child, it certainly is true when you're doing a book, as Greg said. The part that most authors really dread, I think, is when they acknowledge or try to remember everybody, and I'm going to forget some people, and I apologize in advance for that. I've already mentioned Greg, Sheila, and Fred, who were my fact checkers, and Headley Auld did my section. He overlooked my section about the air station at Victoria Beach. Headley, which I really, really appreciate. It was absolutely fascinating. And I don't know how many of you knew that there was actually an air station at Victoria Beach, but there was for 5-6 years. My production people, Donovan Bergman from Friesen Printers. It was just amazing. He always got back to me right away whenever I had a question. And I want to acknowledge Lisa May and Lisa Friesen and her husband and family here this evening. Lisa was my designer. And I didn't pick Lisa just because she lived 5 minutes away from me. I didn't even know that when I chose her. But she did an absolutely amazing job on this book. And when it came to the cover, I said a few weeks ago, I could have probably just had blank pages in this book, and the cover itself, I wanted it to be period. I wanted it to be respectful, and I certainly believe that she has done that. And the way that she was able to take all the bits and pieces, I think she referred to it as a puzzle, and put them together was beyond anything I could have hoped for. So, and I hope you feel the same way. I dealt with archivists all over the place at the Western Canada Pictorial Index, Brett Lougheed, and Corsa DuPont at the Provincial Archives of Manitoba, the Manitoba Legislative Library, Ross Campbell from 17 Wing, the Royal Canadian Aviation Museum, archivist is well helped out. The many cottagers who, whether you donated or allowed me to use one family photograph or many, this book is better because of your willingness, your generosity to forward photographs to me. It was like Christmas, to be honest with you, opening up some of the files and seeing what we had, and some extraordinary photographs. I see Belle is at the back here, and their family took photographs, for example, of the parking lot. I was looking for photographs of the iconic Victoria Beach gate. Again, wow, that's something. I didn't expect that, but I'm so appreciative of it. And it really set off that section so well. Don Heron, Don is in Calgary, but his family, you're going to see a number of pictures in the book taken by George Heron. George Heron was a cottage owner on 4th Avenue at Victoria Beach, and he took pictures even of the store merchants, which was really something. Some of the people I remember, but just capturing that moment in time. And Tam Scott, Tam's not here this evening either, I don't think, but the Scott family goes back many generations at Victoria Beach. I believe it was his grandfather who was the mayor of Victoria Beach at one time, and he gave me access to the family album that had at one point been the property of the Victoria Beach Company. And so you're seeing some images there that have probably not been seen up until now. The Herald editors through the years, they're the keepers of the thing, of the history. And finally, my family for supporting me. My young furry son isn't here tonight, but whenever I'd get stuck and there is such a thing as writer's block, I'd take, not you, Braden, Piper and I would go for a walk, and that would clear my head and what have you, and we would go on. But I appreciate their patience. I spent way too much time away from them or at the dining room table trying to put this together. Anyhow, I'm past my time, so I'm going to say thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest. And I certainly hope you enjoy this book. Thank you.
For questions, anyone has any questions, just raise your hand, please.
Mark, I was just wondering, since Albert Beach is part of Victoria Beach, do you have any pictures of Albert Beach in there?
I don't have any pictures of Albert Beach. It is part of, yes, it is part of Victoria Beach. I basically was focused on the what they now call the vehicle restricted area inside of Victoria Beach. I reference Albert Beach in a few places, especially around the attempts to link Albert Beach with Victoria Beach across the causeway, which in and of itself was a really interesting process. When they started looking at the highway and putting the highway through alongside the railway right-of-way, they ended up biting off more than they could chew, and they were bringing in trucks and trucks and trucks of rock and wood and everything else, trying to build up the marsh. And 1 year they actually gave up in July. The guy said, "I'm done with this." And this was the Department of Highways, because they couldn't, it just kept disappearing into the lake. But yeah, nothing specifically though on Albert.
There's another question over here.
Great job on the bookmark. I quickly looked through it and I was wondering, I know it only goes to the 60s, but did anybody submit a front gate photo from the 70s?
I didn't get any. Are you talking about the pipe gate?
No,
Or
it was
the
made
arch?
of wood. It was made of wood. We used
Okay.
to sit on it and wait for our dads to come in on a
Yeah.
Friday night. I was wondering if anybody submitted a photo.
I didn't receive any photos on that. No,
Okay,
no.
great
The-
job though.
But thank you. The photo, Bill, that you provided me with was that original gate that went up in 1958, or not gate, arch rather, that went up in 1958, which is just amazing to see.
Anyone else?
Mark, this project started with a postcard collection.
Yes,
Where did you find the postcards, and perhaps what's the oldest one?
I found many of them on eBay. And it was kind of funny, it was kind of neat repatriating postcards that had been postmarked out of Victoria Beach, probably at Barber's store. They ran the post office for many years and had gone to England. And here it was coming back to at least someplace close to Victoria Beach. That was a number of them I did find on eBay. The oldest postcards I have are ones that were of the Pinehurst Inn. Now, the Pinehurst Inn, of course, was a hotel that was near the point, and it's a green space today. And I found a collection in Ottawa. I had purchased one and paid significantly for it on eBay. And then I emailed the fellow, the seller, and I said, "Do you have any more?" And he said, "Why, yes, I do. I've got about 8." So we kind of negotiated. And so I have some pictures that were, I'm almost positive are pre-1920 or right at 1920, of the hotel, of the cottages, one of which is a library today. Victoria Beach was great at recycling. Buildings don't leave, they just move. And one of the Pinehurst Inn's cottages became what is today the library. Others became cottages, I believe, within the cottage area, if I'm not mistaken. And that happened with a number of different buildings. Yeah. But the Pinehurst Inn cottages would be the oldest.
Any other questions from the audience?
Can I tell one really quick story? Do we have to?
You can.
I've really been itching to tell this one. In 1944, do you know that Victoria Beach has a connection with Donald Duck? Okay, here we go. Good. Here's a story that comes out of Vancouver. It was in the July 15th, 1944 edition of the Victoria Beach Herald. When Clarence Nash, the voice of Donald Duck, a member of Walt Disney's troupe of entertainers, reached Vancouver after a tour of Canada, he could not find his suitcase among the luggage carried off the car in which he was a passenger. The railway officials and police made a vigorous search for the lost suitcase. The station was searched from end to end, The cars were carefully gone over, inquiries made at a number of local hotels without success until late in the afternoon. The police were informed who the man was who had carried it away. And who do you suppose the culprit was? This is in the Victoria Beach Herald, of course, for all to see and read. None other than Chief Constable George Smith of the Winnipeg Police Force. Chief Constable, he was the police chief. That's what they called the Chief Constable back then. And cottage resident of Victoria Beach. It happened this way. When the chief got off the train, he was met by his brother. After greetings, the brother inquired where the chief's luggage was, pointed out what he thought was a suitcase. The brother carried it away to his auto, and it was only when the chief was getting ready to dine that he discovered that he had taken, he doesn't say George, he keeps reminding people he was the police chief, was getting ready to dine that he discovered he had taken someone else's bag. True to form, he called up the Vancouver police, informed them that he had inadvertently taken someone else's Gladstone, and the initials DD were on it. It did not belong to a doctor of divinity, judging by its contents, said the chief. So a cruiser car was sent out, the chief's baggage was returned to him, and the missing Donald Duck piece returned to its owner. So Donald Duck was able to put on his act at the Vancouver Services Center. And among the act's most vigorous applauders was the Winnipeg chief, who had been invited by Clarence Nash. And saw the well set up figure of the Winnipeg's chief in the audience. He quacked most emphatically, and I'm sorry, I don't do a good Donald Duck. I'll overlook it this time, but don't do it again, quack, quack. But the Vancouver papers did not let it go at that. In black letter headlines, an article said, "Chief of Police takes missing grip." Commenting, the chief said it's good they did not say stolen grip. I didn't go that far. It was all a case of mistaken identity. And the chief soon had back in his possession a well-traveled suitcase with which he had attended 50 some odd police conventions across North America. So there you go, Donald Duck in Victoria Beach. Anyhow, thank you so much.
So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Gregory, and many thanks to all of you for your questions and for your attention. We'll now be moving on to the signing portion of the evening. I'll ask for your patience as we bring Mark to the signing area, after which you'll all be free to join us. We do have copies of tonight's book on the signing table, as well as behind our cash desk. Feel free to have a book signed before you pay for it. We just ask that you please do pay for it at some point in the evening. Thanks again to all of you for joining this evening, and one more round of applause for Mark.
On my water here.
Yeah. Right on mine.
I could have yammered on forever. So.
Well, you know what, that always comes across so much when someone's actually passionate about their subject.
I know.
Yeah, you know, that's
I'm gonna leave this here.
yeah, you know, it's a privilege.
There we go. I'm good. Yeah, I'll get this after. Good.
Thank you.
Good seeing you, Matt. Oh, you look great. Hi there, how are you? We have a call here. I haven't had a chance to really. I mean, it was rock and roll.